Sponsored by Taylor Freelance, Rainier Ballistics, Hodgson Powders, and JPL Precision.
Hey PowerFact fans, I'm Rick, and following up on Larry's episode on USPSA target scoring, I'm going to do a little segment on IDPA target scoring. And even though the holes are the same and the targets are very similar, the actual scoring protocol, if you will, used in IDPA is completely different from USPSA. There is the same sense that a hole has to at least be on the perf of the next higher scoring zone in order to get that scoring, that higher score, but there's not the same requirement for minute examination and measurements and templates. And I think really one of the real good things that came from IDPA was this scoring system. If you've ever shot a match, especially a major match where you've got money on the line, people will argue tooth and claw over a single point. If a range officer, a safety officer scores a target a miss rather than a down 3 or a D zone hit, you'll have targets pulled, you'll have range masters called, and one of the things that the IDPA scoring does is kind of eliminates the adversarial relationship between the range officer and the shooter that exists in USPSA. The shooter is adamant that should be a mic or shouldn't be a mic. The match director comes over, the range officer gets out his templates, and there's a lot of arguing about it. And the scoring system in IDPA is essentially give the benefit of the doubt to the shooter. So any hole that in USPSA would require an argument and templates and yes it is, no it's not, should automatically go to the shooter as the higher scoring value. So now I don't have a target for holes, but in order to make my point, I've just used a Sharpie to draw some holes on this target. Now one of the things that I do as a range officer when I'm scoring is I intentionally don't get too close to the target. About 3 feet away is as close as I ever get to make the call, because I don't want the doubt about, well, is that hitting the line or not, to be part of my scoring. I mean, I want to look at the hole and go, yeah, that's down 1, that's down 0, and I'll just crank them out like that and not be concerned about whether the radial tear is touching the perforation or not. You know, I mean, you're actually encouraged to kind of leave that part out of it. So here we have a target, and the camera is set up just about as far away from the target as I would normally stand to score. And I'll bring the target closer so that we can get an actual look at where the holes are relative to the perforations. But if you look at this, we have 4 holes around the down 0 zone. 2, I don't know if you'll be able to tell, you know, based on your monitor and whatnot, but the 2 lower holes are clearly not touching the down 0 scoring line. They're not touching it, they're not near it. This hole is touching the perforation. This hole is actually over the perforation and into the down 0 zone. So standing about where the camera is and looking at this target, it's easy for me to see that these 2 are both down 1 hits. And I would call them, you know, down 1 without hesitation. These upper 2, I would call those down 0, but at a USPSA match, if I were acting as a range officer rather than a safety officer, I might very well call this one a C zone hit outside of the A zone because it's not breaking the perf. But of course in IDPA, I'm not required to scrutinize the hole to that extent. I can just look at it and go, oh yeah, that's down 0. And what that means is that the shooter should never disagree with me. I mean, that's what it comes down to, but that does sometimes happen. And what you get then is this kind of a catch-22 situation where the rule book says that the safety officer is not supposed to overly scrutinize any given hole. You're not supposed to stand there and, geez, is that a, you know, you're supposed to give the benefit of the doubt to the shooter. But then if the shooter doesn't like the call, he's going to ask you to go back and scrutinize it. And if the rule book says if the hole has to be scrutinized, the shooter should get the higher value, that suggests that any time a shooter questions your scoring, you have to give him the higher value. And so then you're kind of put in this position, okay, now I really do have to look at the hole and scrutinize it the way a USPSA range officer would, because I've been kind of called out on my scoring from 3 feet away saying, nah, it's down 1. And the shooter's like, oh, come on, come over here and take a look at it again. So now I've got to put my nose right up to it. And when you do that, let's pull the target out here. It's pretty easy to see that these holes are outside of the perf, but I think a safety officer would be correct in calling both of these shots as down 0. I think also because these are drawn on here with a pen, you don't have the complication of the grease ring or radial tears. You're never going to see a perfect hole unless somebody's shooting 45 semi-wad cutters, which often do cut a perfectly clean hole. But the idea of when you're scoring the target is look at it, give it a good look. You want to make the right call, but you don't want to labor over 2 holes like this, deciding that this one is down 0 and this one is down 1 as a safety officer. And as a shooter, you should expect to get that call. I shot a classifier match a couple of years ago, and the range officer was also a USPSA safety officer, the USPSA safety officer who was acting as an IDPA range officer, and he was essentially scoring the targets as if it were a USPSA match. He was sticking his nose right up to him, looking to see if the perf was broken, that kind of thing. And he looked at the target, and I would say the bullet hole was pretty much like this. It maybe didn't actually break a perf, but if you stood even a foot away, you'd have to really study it. And his argument was, of course, is that it didn't break the perf. Whereas my argument was you had to get your nose this close to tell, so you should have given me the higher scoring value on that hit without putting your nose this close to it. So that's kind of you shouldn't be denied a point because somebody went and scrutinized the target. I mean, that's exactly what it is. But if you're a shooter and you ask the SO to go back and scrutinize the target, you shouldn't necessarily expect to get the higher hit. And if you make a habit of that, trying to essentially pick up a point or 2 or 3 every match by asking the safety officer repeatedly to stick his nose up to your target, as a safety officer, I would start to get rather irritated with that behavior. The rules dictate that I give you the benefit of the doubt. So if you're constantly trying to get another point or 2 out of me by asking me to go take a closer look, it might just actually have the opposite result. So be aware of that as well. Now here's another interesting situation. This hole is right at the conjunction of the down 0 zone, the down 1 zone, the down 3 zone, and then of course if it's not within any of those zones, it's a mic. So that could be an interesting argument. If the safety officer were to call that a mic and I were the shooter, I would say you can't tell that's a mic without getting your nose right up to it. But then if I did put my nose right up to it, what would I call? Is that a down 0? Is it a down 1? Is it a down 3? Well, I would argue as a safety officer that, knowing the rules as I do, that if it's not a mic and the benefit of the doubt goes to the shooter, it must be a down 0. If it's equally distant from the down 3, the down 1, and the down 0 zone, if it's not a mic, it must be a down 0. So that's just kind of that's what you should expect at a match. You shouldn't expect to not get a hit because it's not breaking the perf, but then you should also be kind of reasonable as a shooter to not demand too much in excess of just getting those kind of questionable calls. Don't put the range officer on the spot by continually asking for another opinion, because once I stick my nose up there, you again might not get the call that you want, and if you make a habit of it, you might never get the call you want. So there's IDPA scoring in a nutshell.
Hi, welcome to Power Factor. I'm Larry, and so last time you saw me here, I introduced to you my new open gun. Here she is again, based on the Glock 23 compact 40 caliber open gun. And this week we're actually going to take it to the range. I finally had a chance to go and pull the trigger on this thing and put some ammo loaded specifically for open division through this thing and get to go test it out. So when you're building an open gun, especially a 40 open gun, as I've discussed in the past, the load development is kind of a long process. You're kind of on your own to figure out what powders and what bullets and what bullet, weight, powder charge, whatever works best with your particular compensator. Hopefully you can find something that works fairly quickly. Since I've done this before, I had some more experience from my past 40 open guns. So you'll see in these videos, we got up to major on the first try out. Last time it took me quite a long time to find the right load that would make major power factor. That's goal number one, make major power factor. Goal number two would then be to get the gun tuned up so that it feels right, it shoots flat, the dot stays in the lens during recoil, or it comes back so fast you don't even hardly notice it leaving the lens during recoil. And all those things have to do with, as I was saying earlier, choices of bullet weight, which generally in the 40, the lightest is the best, 135 grain. Type of powder, what quickness your powder is, or how fast the burn rate is. Recoil springs play quite a big role. Compensator design plays quite a big role. But making major, at least figuring out what it takes to make major, is the first step, and that's where we're at right now. So we headed down to the Paul Bunyan range, and it was about 45 degrees outside. I don't know if that it matters a bit, but it's just one data point so far. I'm not going to be able to test these loads in warmer temperatures for quite some time. So most powders will shoot a little bit less velocity. Most ammo will shoot a little bit less velocity when the ambient temperature outside is lower. Some powders are inverse temperature sensitive, however, but I believe this powder is standard. If it has any temperature sensitivity at all, it's probably standard. Colder means slower. So anyway, went down to the Paul Bunyan range. We've got a little bit of video from the range. We're not going to put you through watching me shoot 25 rounds over the chrono, but let's just go ahead and go straight to the range time video, and we'll come back after that and discuss the results. Okay, now we're at the range, and we're going to start testing some loads through the gun. We're going to try and see if we can make major power. So I'm running the Rainier Ballistics 135 grain bullets, and I've got 10 rounds of each charge weight loaded up. I've got 3 different loads with Hodgdon CFE pistol, and then I've got 2 separate loads of Alliant power pistol. We're going to see how we do. Okay, so here's what the 8.3 grains of CFE pistol looks like. Okay, here's the 8.4 grains of CFE pistol. Here's the 8.5 grains of CFE pistol. Okay, now this is the first load of power pistol. This is 8.5 grains of power pistol. This is 8.7 grains of power pistol. Test results. I've got them all written down here on my little card. I use these primer box for writing load data on and things like that. So the 8.3 grains of power pistol, now keep in mind this is only 5-shot average. Now, and also, just so you know, I didn't set up my reloading press, totally adjust the powder, to dial it in exactly to these loads, spend all that time adjusting the press, and then crank out 10 rounds, and then go to adjust the press again, and then crank out 10 rounds. What I did was, I made 50 rounds, 10 of each load, and I just simply hand weighed each charge. So I had my pan on my scale, and I would trickle in some powder until it got up to 8.3, 8.4, and 8.5 grains of Hodgdon CFE pistol powder. And if I was shooting for 8.3 and I happened to get one land on 8.4, I would put it in the 8.4 row on my loading tray. And then, so I would keep going until I got 10 rounds of each, with exactly what I was looking for. And if I had to, if I went way over, I would trickle out some powder and put the pan back on there and get it back down to say 8.5. If I overshot the 8.5, I'd come back down, but then I would empty the pan, re-tear it, and reweigh it again, and make sure, I went back and forth on a lot of these to make sure that it weighed right. So all these charges were hand weighed, so they might not be perfect for whatever reason. They're not exactly what the press would throw, so there might be more variability is what I'm saying than what my press would throw. But anyway, so some of these results aren't going to make much sense because more powder sometimes equals less velocity. But anyway, so the first one we tested was 8.3 grains of Hodgdon CFE pistol, and again this was with a 135 grain Rainier Ballistics bullet, and we made 1,232 feet per second average of the 5 shots, which is a 166 power factor calculated. So yeah, that's major, but a little too close for comfort. You want a little bit more cushion than that. You like to be up around 169, 170, just in case you're chronoing at a big match. You happen to have a couple of light ones, you don't want to go under. So we moved up to 8.4 grains of CFE, and this one came down to 1194, I don't know, for whatever reason. So the first one was 1232, this is 1194 with only a 161 power factor. So might have been some weird fluke with that one. Definitely needs more testing. The next load was 8.5 of CFE, and I know these are only varying by 1/10 of a grain, so that is a very minute difference. These could nearly be the same, just about. But so from 8.3 to 8.5, we went from 1232 was my first result to this one is 1244. So it is up slightly to a 168 power factor. A little bit better in terms of power factor, a little bit better. So now my power pistol loads. 8.5 and 8.7. I decided to go with 8.7 because that's what I was using in the past with a 5-inch barreled 40 open gun out of an STI. This is a 4.5-inch barrel, so just a little shorter. 8.7 was my previous load, so I wanted to start with 8.5 and then work up to 8.7 and test those two. The 8.5 of power pistol gave me a 165 power factor exactly at 1223 average velocity, and 1211 for some reason with the 8.7. I don't know why it would be less, but it was less. So this definitely needs more testing, but the good news is I'm in the right ballpark. The last time I did this with an STI open gun, I started off with Silhouette as my powder, Ramshot Silhouette, and I would work up to loads, that were book loads that would get me up right to the max, and I still would only be like at 155 power factor. I was just like, man, it would just take me forever to finally, back then it took me a long time to finally find something that would just make major, and then it was tune the gun after that, as I've described. So at least this time, first time out, with that experience, I got to major territory right off the bat. Now, how did it feel? Well, so first of all, I had a pretty stiff recoil spring in here at the range. So the muzzle flip that you see in those videos is going to be different than what I've got in here now. I've now got the ISMI, the lightest recoil spring they offer for the compact gun, which is a 13 pound. I don't even know how heavy that other recoil spring was. It was on the guide rod that I got from the guy that I purchased these parts from, and it was heavier than stock, I believe. So this one is quite a bit lighter. This 13-pound spring is quite a bit lighter, and that should keep the muzzle down a bit in recoil. So that's step one. So the next time I test this out, it'll be with the new recoil spring. The other thing I experienced was quite a lot of recoil. This thing is a thumper. So I am in no way endorsing or encouraging any of you to go out and do what I'm doing. This is a fun little experiment for me, and if it works and when it works, I'll be tickled to death, and I'll go play with it, and I'll go compete with it. But for now, this is still in the experimental phase. It has been done before by somebody I've seen on the internet running a 23 open gun. I have no idea what their experience was. I have no idea if they were able to get it to shoot flat. I have no idea if I'm going to be able to get this to shoot flat. But we definitely have too much gas going out the end of the comp. We've shown that by doing our test. It's got a little tear in the target, and that was with Power Pistol, which is a faster powder than the CFE, Hodgdon CFE pistol. I know, don't get confused between CFE pistol and Power Pistol. What else could be contributing to that? Compensator design, for sure. This is considered to be a 4-port comp with bleeders in the last 3 chambers. I haven't measured these ports yet, but they seem to be quite narrow compared to previous STI gun I had. The other thing I noticed that I'm not going to be able to show you because it's just a dark hole in there, but it appears the way this compensator is cut, it appears that it was like kind of a plunge cut with a cutter. So what I'm trying to say is the chambers are kind of U-shaped at the bottom. It almost looks like it was a big diameter cutter, just like plunge cut 1, 2, 3, 4. That does not allow for as much surface area on these baffles. The front part of each of these chambers, it would be just called a baffle, or the piece of metal between each chamber is called a baffle. So as the back end of the bullet is just coming through and just getting lined up with the front of that face. All the gases are hitting the back of the bullet and the face of that baffle, and that's what yanks the gun forward. And with less surface area, maybe it's not performing as well as it could if it was cut square. So that's something I didn't know about the compensator until I bought it and had a chance to look at it, because I'd never actually had one in my hands before. So one solution, once I test various loads, and I'm even considering testing a 155 grain bullet also to put less powder so that there's less gas, so that it will exit the chamber, exit the compensator sooner. I'm not expecting that to work out too well, but I think it's going to be one of my tests in the future. But as far as compensator design goes, if it comes down to that, I got a couple of options. Could buy something different. I've got something I've designed that I would have to have somebody make for me, which would be a very costly endeavor, or possibly chuck this thing up in a mill and square off the bottom of these chambers instead of them being U-shaped, to square off the bottom and give more surface area for the gases to really slam up against those chambers and yank the gun forward and keep the muzzle down. So, oh, the adventures in 40 open, let me tell you, so much fun. Okay, so now after we fired all of our rounds through the chrono, the very last thing we did was I took a couple of rounds to do my little compensator test that we talked about back in the 40 open episode, whenever that was. So the discussion back that we talked about then was to take your open gun, here we are, put your muzzle about 1 inch from the target and fire a shot. And as we showed in a previous video, the results of that test, where if there was too much gas going out the end of the compensator, the target would tear. And of course we showed one with, you know, back in that episode we showed you one with an open load through a limited gun and no compensator, and it blew a hole this big in the target. And then some other loads I was testing with silhouette and eventually power pistol, and the power pistol in my old open gun gave a real nice clean hole with no tear. So we'll show you that test here. I only had 2 rounds left by the time I remembered to do this, so these were both fired with power pistol. So check this out. Okay, so as you see, we fired 2 shots into the white side of the target. I touched the muzzle up to the target and pulled it back about 1 inch. And in both shots, I had what I consider to be too much gas going out the end of the compensator with a little vertical tear in the target. So still need to tinker with some loads based on that one test. That's not the end-all be-all test, but it is one of many tests that I use to determine what is a good load to tune to my gun. So otherwise, I gotta say, I mean, just holding the gun, just the feel of the gun, it feels really good in my hand. One of the things that I was concerned about was right here, my pinky finger, which in the Glock factory finger grooves, my hand occupies the entire grip. The compact grip is about perfect for me. My hands aren't too big for it, in other words. But I was concerned about the magwell intruding on that last finger groove. Well, it definitely does. As you can see, my finger is gripping the front of the magwell there. But honestly, I don't even really notice it. It doesn't, I suppose, you know, after a long session of dry fire, which I have not had a long session of dry fire, I've had some shorter sessions of dry fire, I could see where my finger kind of half on the edge of that magazine well could get to be a little bit annoying, but in 30 seconds of shooting in a stage, something like that, it's not a big deal at all. So, you know, overall, I'm still really excited about this. I think it will be fun if I can make it work, and I enjoy taking you guys along with me on this journey, trying to see if we can make the Shorty 40 actually shoot flat and be somewhat competitive at my skill level. See if I can get this thing up into A-class scores. That'll be fun. So thanks for watching. This is, like I say, it's an adventure for me. I'm in no way endorsing this as a platform that all of you should go out and jump into, not by any stretch of the imagination, but it's fun to do it, and I hope you enjoy watching me go through the process. So if you have any questions, go ahead and shoot us email. Our email address, of course, is powerfactorshow@gmail.com. Please like us on Facebook, facebook.com/powerfactorshow. Probably most of you guys, to maybe a third of you guys, are watching this on YouTube. We're Power Factor Show on YouTube. We get a lot of views otherwise on iTunes and automatic downloads on the podcast app for iPhones. And there's so many ways to watch the show, and we appreciate every one of you guys, every one of our viewers, and appreciate all of our sponsors too. So please check them out. Go give Shane a call at Rainier Ballistics. He'll hook you up or tell you where you can go to get their bullets. I really like them. They work very well for me. Hodgdon powder, of course, if you can get your hands on some. It's good stuff. And JPL Precision, Taylor Freelance, we thank all of them for helping us out as well. And until next week, I'm Larry. Thanks.